Hello, my name is Lauren Scafe. I am with ICT Therapy Works this year, which is a private practice office composed of both social workers and LMFTs for my practicum this year. There are around 12 therapists in the office, all specializing in various issues from sex therapy to grief counseling to work with children. So it's a wide variety of folks in the office. But the case study that I'm going to present today, I guess to start out, I want to say that I have altered some of the information just to protect their identity. But for the most part, it's all things that we've been dealing with. But this client came to therapy. ICT Therapy Works for individual therapy for multiple reasons, but primarily for a traumatic coming out to his parents, deconstruction of religion, and generalized anxiety disorder that has affected most every relationship in his life. At this time, there are no other agencies involved, and my role for this client is to be his therapist. So when he first came to me, the very first thing that I noticed was how visibly anxious he was. He was fidgeting around in his chair, tapping his feet the entire time, and even his breathing was at an increased rate. So, in that first initial appointment, I really just kind of tried to slow down the process. He shared with me that he had never done therapy before, but that he has always been a really anxious person. So I just really worked on kind of like attuning with him and trying to help him feel more comfortable physically being in my office. So that was kind of the work that we initially did, and just really putting some language to the way that he felt. Because in his home, emotions, which we'll get into that in a minute, but emotions and things like that were just generally not acceptable. So I don't think he even had the language to say how he was feeling. But as I was saying, as a young child, he reported that mental health was not something really that anybody, but especially the boys in his family, were able to discuss. He grew up in a very patriarchal home, where he said, emotional and verbal abuse were commonplace. He also reported that from a very young age, his family made it very known that being gay was an absolutely unacceptable lifestyle. And he never really said why it was brought up a lot, but he said, it was often even like a weekly discussion about, the fact that it was wrong. So he never shared the truth, his own truth. In addition to all that, and to kind of add another layer to it, he grew up in a very evangelical home. And if you're familiar with evangelical teachings, it is not affirming of the LGBTQ community. So he internalized these feelings of shame about who he was. And kind of to further those feelings, he was best friends with his mom. In fact, he reports that he would talk to her sometimes as much as 6 times a day, and she was one of these like predominant voices in his head about what was right and what was wrong. In fact, we've done a lot of work around kind of differentiation between his family and himself, because he even reported that in college, he went away, and even at that time, he was talking to his mom 6 times a day. He would ask her if it was okay for him to go to a party. He would call and ask if it was okay to get away with his friends. Just lots of behaviors that, at that point in your life, you should have some autonomy over. So we talked about that a lot. But he did kind of, despite all of that, he was able to explore new relationships in his life, had his first 2 boyfriends, but did report that even where he went to college was the general attitude, the culture there was not accepting of the LGBTQ community either. So he kind of had these relationships that were hidden even then. After graduation, he moved to Wichita, got a great job. He is financially independent, personally independent now. And I think enough things have changed in his life that around Christmas time, he decided that he was going to come out to his parents. He basically just told me, like, I couldn't keep the truth of who I am inside anymore, and I don't want to. It's a great part of him, and he wants to share that. Unfortunately, when he did, it ended up being a major turning point in his life because his family, he told his mom and his dad, and that was met with verbal abuse beyond any level that he had ever experienced it before. And so since coming out, a lot of his family, they have disowned him, and just the trauma of that experience has created in him an anxiety that is to a new level that he's never experienced before. So, in our time together, I'm really happy to report that he has expressed, without me asking, but he has expressed that we've made a lot of progress. Not only is the therapy space a safe place for him to explore his sexuality, his religion, his mental health, all of these things that he has internalized so much shame over. He feels so accepted there. And so that's been, a big part of our work together. But he reports that has been a really healing part of his journey. In addition to that, faith is still something that's really important to him. So we talk a lot about finding an affirming church here and deconstructing a lot of that church, the religious teachings that he has learned. And we're working on deconstructing that internalized homophobia that he really still carries very strongly today. I've tried to give him all the resources that I know, which are like books and churches in the community that are affirming, podcasts, and I think those have been really helpful for him. But the biggest thing we're working on right now is boundaries. As recently as the last few weeks, his mom has tried to kind of start reaching out again, just through text messages. And so we've talked a lot about what does this mean for him? What does he want in his life? What makes him feel safe? How does he want his family to be a part of his life? And he has a really serious partner now. And, how does his partner fit into that? And what does he want? And just really reminding him that there is this healthy degree of differentiation that he's creating in his life. And while it's heartbreaking, he gets to make those decisions on who gets to be a part of his life and who doesn't anymore. So we talk a lot about that. And then the other thing that we talk a lot about is just his anxiety in general. Mental health was not something that was discussed in their home. And also there was a lot of shame and making fun of, essentially, people that struggle with mental illness and take medications for it. And so just really doing a lot of like psychoeducation around mental illness and, adding medication to your life if you need to. And that's perfectly fine. It's just another tool for the toolbox. And then we've also been talking a lot about a lot of ways to really regulate his nervous system to help with his anxiety. His anxiety really kind of shows up in all areas of his life. And so how can he work on his anxiety at work, at home? Lots of rumination around past relationships and the way they're affecting his relationship now. And so really kind of like how to manage those thoughts and what the root of them is. And so lots of work around that. And then in terms of termination, we're not there yet, to be honest. I kind of feel like we're like right at the heart of our work together. We're just still like deconstructing so much and doing so much education. But we talk about often that every single week he is building resources within himself, and by going to therapy and by reading good, books by great authors and listening to podcasts and finding supportive people in his life that love him for all the reasons that he is him. And so we're really not to the termination phase, but we've talked a lot about how, people can come to therapy for, any length of time. And then if they need to, it can always be a resource in their life. So kind of when you go into that maintenance mode, but really right now we're just still doing a lot of work together. So that is my case study. Thank you so much for listening. If you have any questions, comments, concerns about anything you've heard today, please feel free to let me know.